In today's video, I am going to share with you how I used my Cricut Maker to cut a piece of foam interfacing and a piece of quilting cotton that it's already interfaced. I'm going to share the settings that I used, and at the end of the video, you will see a quick summary of which settings work the best and what my recommendations would be. Let's get started. So we're going to start by cutting foam here in design space. And as you can see, I have two images in design space, but I really only want to cut one of them. So I'm going to hide the little one and just keep the main body. So when I click continue, here I have a message asking me to select the correct mat, and that's because the image or the pattern that I want to cut, it's over 12 inches long, so I need to select the 12 by 24 inches mat. And of course I want to make sure that my pattern is lined up to the corner, making sure that it matches the actual material on the mat. Next, we're going to pick the materials to use. As you can see, I have some bookmarked materials, but there's also a section with popular materials already saved. If you cannot find what you're looking for, you can always click where it says browse all materials and then type the type of material that you are looking to cut. So I'm selecting the flex foam here and click done. Then I'm going to choose the pressure, and I'm going to do the default and see how that works. So after we do that, I go to my machine and I click go and start the cutting process. And so I noticed that it didn't cut the foam very well, so I'm just gonna go ahead and run it again through the machine, but this time I'm going to select more pressure, and let's run it again, making sure that it is aligned and it cuts over the original cutting line. That way it is not uneven when we're done cutting the fabric. So I noticed that there were some sections that the rotary blade didn't completely cut. So I'm just trimming them off using my sewing scissors. So I guess for the next time, I will use more pressure the first time around. And if I have to run it again with more pressure, I will. But hopefully one time will be enough so that I don't have to cut now those little pieces that for some reason the blade didn't catch. Consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel if you have learned something today. So the first thing I do when cutting fabric with the Cricut is that I take my pattern pieces and place them on the piece of fabric that I'm going to cut. So that way I know how much fabric I really need and how many pieces to place on my mat. And if I don't have the pattern pieces, I try to get a piece of paper with the general measurements. So in this case, I had to cut the fabric in two pieces. The first piece is the long one for the main body of my project, and then I'll do the other part. So this is interfaced fabric. You can place it facing down, facing up. It doesn't really matter. That is not really that important. What is important is that however you place it on your mat, that it matches exactly, and design space. Since right now we're cutting the main body, I'm going to hide the other pieces that I will be cutting later on. And here, of course, double check making sure the mat size matches depending on the size of your project, and that the pattern fits inside your design space and it matches what your physical fabric and mat looks like. Now let's select our materials, and I'm going to use fusible fabric, the default pressure, and let's give a try for this setting. Okay, let's try it. So I'm noticing that it didn't cut the fabric all the way through the blade with this default pressure. So I'm just gonna have to do the same thing I did before. Take my sewing scissors and just pretty much snip around the areas that is still together, that the machine didn't completely cut. But now I know either this pressure doesn't work, or maybe I need to choose another setting. Okay, so let's cut the other pieces of this pattern that will go in this small square of fabric here. Making sure that when you place the fabric on the mat that there are no bubbles and everything is completely flat against the mat. As you can see, I'm placing some of my paper pattern pieces on the fabric. This is to give me an idea of how I'm going to cut it. In order to be able to take the most advantage of my fabric and have the least amount of waste. And I'm going to use this as a guide to do it when I'm sending the pieces to cut here in design space. So when I'm in design space, I'm going to move the pattern pieces around so that they match the way I planned it when I was using the paper pattern. I hope I'm making sense. And you're able to make this arrangement of your pattern pieces right before you're sending it to cut. And this is one of the cool features of Design Space, that you can actually move the pieces around right before you send it to the machine to be cut, because you know how much fabric you really have and how much space you have available for cutting, etc. So this is a great feature that I use all the time, where I move the pieces around at this stage right before sending it to be cut, and that's exactly how it's going to cut it once it gets to the machine. Okay, this is perfect. Let's hit continue now to move on to the next phase, which is selecting the material. And I'm going to try something a little bit different. I am going to use the fusible fleece setting, and I'm going to leave it with more pressure and see how that works. Or the layout I had on the fabric matches the layout in the computer. So let's give it a try. And the moment of truth, look, it comes out just perfect. I didn't have to use my scissors. It comes right off. It cut it perfectly. No jagged corners or anything. So this definitely was the best setting for my interfaced fabric. So in conclusion, if you're going to be cutting foam and you select the flex foam setting, make sure that you use the more pressure right off the bat. That way you avoid having the issue that I had where I had to cut it twice. Hopefully with more pressure the first time around, it will cut all the foam or as much of it as possible. When it comes to your interfaced quilting cotton, if you're going to use the fusible fabric setting, make sure that you also select more pressure instead of the regular default, because you want to make sure that it cuts as much of the fabric as possible and you don't have any pieces that you have to snip with your sewing scissors. However, I think we can all see after testing that the preferred setting for cutting interfaced quilting cotton would be fusible fleece. Now, I will probably try the default pressure next time. I know we tested and we did more pressure, which it worked perfectly. So you can try more pressure if you want, but I think I would give it a try and do default pressure as well and see how that works. But if you want to cut interfaced quilting cotton, I think the fusible fleece setting is the way to go.